Before he became the greatest general China had ever seen, Han Xin crawled between a street bully's legs, a starving nobody, a man too poor to feed himself. Within 10 years he would conquer 4 kingdoms and hand one man the entire empire. He never lost a single battle, not one. So why was the man who won the empire lured to a palace and killed by the emperor's own wife? This is the story of Han Xin, the god of war they could not afford to let live. Han Xin was born a commoner in Huaiyin with nothing, no land, no rank, no famous name. He carried a sword he could not use and a hunger he could not fill. He drifted, he begged. People fed him out of pity, then grew tired of him. One washerwoman saw him starving by the river and gave him her own meal. For weeks, he swore he would repay her one day. She laughed at him, a grown man who couldn't even eat. Then came the moment that branded him. A butcher's son blocked his path in the market. "Kill me," he sneered, "or crawl between my legs." The whole street waited for blood. Han Xin looked at him a long time. Then he got down and crawled. They called him a coward. They were wrong. He had already learned the lesson that would make him unbeatable. Never fight the battle in front of you. Fight the one that wins. War tore the country open. The Qin Empire collapsed and China bled into civil war. Han Xin went to the strongest warlord alive, Xiao He, the invincible overlord of Chu. He offered plan after plan. Xiao He, who trusted only his own spear, ignored everyone. So he slipped away to Xiao He's rival, a nobody made good named Liu Bang. There, too, he was nothing, just another officer. He was even sentenced to die once, and spared at the blade. One man saw it. Xiao He, Liu Bang's chancellor, talked to Han Xin once, and understood. But before Xiao He could act, Han Xin gave up and rode off into the dark. When Xiao He heard, he didn't send a messenger. He chased him himself, alone, through the night. He dragged him back and stood before Liu Bang. This man is the unrivaled hero of the nation. Lose him, and you lose everything. Liu Bang built an altar and handed the begging, humiliated drifter command of his entire army. What happened next, no one was ready for. As the legend goes, he made a show of rebuilding the burned plank roads, then swept his army back through the Chenkang Pass and seized the heartland of Qin overnight. Then came the battle they still teach today. At Jingxing, Han Xin had only a few tens of thousands, by one account barely a few thousand, most of them raw recruits. Zhao waited with a force it called 200,000 strong. He did the unthinkable. He put his armies back against a river with no way to retreat. His own officers thought he had gone mad. Cornered men cannot run. So cornered men do not run. They fight like the dead. While Zhao threw everything at that trapped line, 2,000 of Han Xin's horsemen slipped into their empty camp and tore down every Zhao flag. Zhao turned around to a fortress flying enemy colors. They thought they had already lost. Then they did. Kingdom after kingdom fell to him. Wei, Dai, Zhao. Yan bent the knee without a fight. At the Wei River, the last great enemy army marched against him. Han Xin had his men dam the river upstream in the night. He lured them halfway across the dry bed, then broke the dam. A wall of water swallowed them, their commander drowned with his men. In a few short years, the beggar from Huaiyin had become the deadliest weapon in China. And that was exactly the problem. A general who never loses does not just win wars. He becomes a man too dangerous to keep and too dangerous to throw away. With Zhao and Qi in his hand, Han Xin held the balance of the whole war. Whoever he backed would rule China. He could have taken it for himself. Advisors begged him to. He refused, out of loyalty to the man who raised him. Instead, he sent Liu Bang a request. Make me acting king of Qi. Liu Bang, surrounded by the enemy at that very moment, read it and burned with rage. My general asks for a crown while I'm dying here. He swallowed it and made him a real king, but he never forgot. Then came the end of Xiang Yu. At Gaixia, Han Xin closed the trap on the invincible overlord. In the night, Han's camps sang the songs of Chu. Xiang Yu's men heard their homeland in the dark and lost the will to fight. The greatest warrior of the age cut his own throat by a river. Han Xin had won the empire. They asked Liu Bang once how many troops he could lead. 100,000, he said. And you, Han Xin? Me? The more the better. It was the truth. It was also a death sentence. The war was over, and a peacetime emperor has no use for a weapon that can kill him. First, Liu Bang stripped his kingdom of Qi, then his kingdom of Chu, then his rank, down to a minor marquis under house watch. The man who commanded armies without limit now sat idle, watched, waiting. Then a revolt broke out in the north, and a whisper reached the palace. Han Xin is in on it. The emperor was away at war. His empress Liu Ji decided to act. She could not just summon him. He was too careful. So she turned to the one man Han Xin would always trust, Xiao He, the man who had chased him through the night, the man who made him. Xiao He sent word, "Come to the palace, congratulate the court on crushing the revolt," an old friend's invitation. Han Xin walked in. The gates closed behind him. By some accounts, the emperor had once sworn Han Xin would never be killed, not seeing the sky, not touching the ground, not by any blade of iron. So legend says they found the loophole. They hung him inside a great bell, where he saw neither heaven nor earth, and palace women ran him through with spears of sharpened bamboo. Whatever the method, the histories agree on the rest. He died in the bell chamber of Chang'e Palace, and his entire clan was wiped out with him. His last words were not about the empress. They were a regret that he had not rebelled when he still could. The man who could read every battlefield in China had misread the only one that killed him, a friend's smile. They have a saying about him 4 characters long, made by Xiao He, undone by Xiao He. The same hand that lifted him out of the gutter is the hand that sealed the gate. Han Xin could command 1,000,000 men and never lose. He just never learned the one move that might have saved him: when to stop trusting the man who made you. Welcome to the Dragon Files. Subscribe for more.